Good morning, I'm Robert Ockman and welcome to the second Wednesday morning roundtable program of the session. To our membership, we so appreciate your support. Although this content is currently free and accessible to the public, if you haven't joined the roundtable, we encourage you to do so. Please visit auburndowntown.org and click on WMR. This Downtown Auburn BID program is brought to you by Tompkins Trust Company. The program features a forum with New York State Assembly 126th District candidates Dia Carabajal and John Lemondes with moderator Guy Cosentino. Guy is the Executive Director of Cayuga Community College Foundation. Thank you everyone for joining us, and Guy, I'll let you do the introductions.
Thank you, Robert. Good morning, everyone. As we tape this is the 14th of October, but this will be shown on October 21st and then put online at the Citizen and other venues. And we want to hope that everyone is well. We hope in the near future to be back together as a group. We're thinking most likely in January or February at our new premises at Westminster Church in Auburn on the Loop Road, but we'll have more information about that later. But as we have done over the last several years, we have had forums every October, I think for every year except for one, for the Wednesday morning roundtable. And we'd like to introduce to you the candidates for the 126th Assembly District. This is a district that largely includes parts of Cayuga County, as well as includes the city of Auburn. And we have with us in the order they will be speaking, Dia Carabajal, who is on the Democratic and Working Families Party line, and John Lemondes, who is on the Republican, Conservative, and Independence Party lines. We want to welcome both of you to the Wednesday morning roundtable. We're delighted to have you here. We're going to start with a 2-minute opening. We did this by a flip of the coin. Somebody was in the office and flipped the coin for both of you. Dia Carabajal on the Democratic and Working Families Party line will go first. She'll have 2 minutes. We do have Jesse Klein, our coordinator here, to pop up a sign. We have used 1.5 minutes, and then at 2 minutes to hopefully bring you to wrap up, or else I interrupt. So with that, Ms. Carabajal, you'll go first. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Guy. Thank you, Jesse. Thank you to the Wednesday morning roundtable for inviting me here today via Zoom to talk to everybody. For those of you who don't know, I am Dia Carabajal, and I am running in the New York State, or for New York State Assembly in the 126th Assembly District to represent Central New York in Albany. So I'm running for this position to be in the majority caucus. I have been twice elected to the Auburn School Board, and I have been on the Auburn City Council, and I'm ready to be your voice in Albany. My core values include fighting for equitable funding for our schools, both K through 12 and higher ed, especially our community colleges, advocating for the health of our Finger Lakes as they're threatened by global climate disruption, promoting economic development through arts and culture, striving for equity and social justice, and supporting working families and labor. I'm a mathematics professor and computer science professor at Cayuga Community College. I live in history's hometown in Auburn, New York, with my husband Lee and my son, who's a junior at Syracuse University. I invite the people of the 126th Assembly District to trust me with their votes, as they have done in the past. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Carabajal. Now we'll hear from John Lemondes, who is on the Republican, Conservative, and Independence lines. Sir, welcome.
Guy, thank you, everyone. I really appreciate the opportunity to converse with all of you and tell you my story as to why I wish to be your representative for all New Yorkers, as well as especially in the 126th District, where I live and operate a farm. I am a father of 3, a small business owner, a farmer, a youth coach, former parish council member for 4.5 years, as well as a very concerned citizen. And I'm running for office on the background of my diverse experience. I spent 27 years in the military, retiring as a colonel, having served all over the world in places like Afghanistan and Iraq. I have served with every demographic of America and in an apolitical sense, which is very important for office holders. I think the political climate today has very few people that understand what apolitical service is. And this is part of the reason why we have such difficulty in reaching common ground on anything. So I want to be a voice for the people to stop that, be a part of the team that brings people together, and make progress for New York. In this district, there are 133,000 people. There are 54,000 households. I want to represent every one of them equally, regardless of party. My experience in business in the defense electronics industry, my experience as a small business owner, as a farmer, as a father and a husband, gives me extreme opportunity to represent the diversity of this district and our state. The number one business in this particular district is agriculture, and there's no better representative for the farmers of the district than another farmer. So I will leave you with that. Thank you for the opportunity. It's a pleasure to meet you, and I look forward to the debate.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
So over the next 55 minutes, before we do closing statements, we will talk about a number of issues that are affecting the state. Obviously, we're going to talk about the budget and where we are on that, and some secondary issues to the budget, as well as some criminal justice issues. But I really want to start off with, and we'll start with Mr. Lemondes first, is the issue that we're all dealing with because we're here remotely, this COVID-19 and the worldwide pandemic. So from the start, and I want to keep this on the state level, we don't need to deal with the global, national level unless you want to. How do you think the governor, and more importantly, Albany as a whole, has dealt with the response to COVID since, let's say, March 13th and thereabouts? And you have 2 minutes on that.
We're all talking from one respect or another in isolation as a result of the circumstances that we find ourselves in. So with respect to the question of how has the state handled it, I think, Guy, my answer is very short. Although I believe in the ability of leaders at certain points in time to have more authority than normal, I think it has gone on much too long. I think the bill submitted by Assembly Leader Barclay to curtail executive powers is the right thing to do, and that should be returned to the legislature. The leadership by mandate has gone on far too long.
All right. Ms. Carvajal, on the issue of how has the state responded to the COVID-19 issue statewide?
So under emergency situations, executives need to have the power to go ahead and make executive decisions. You need to have that kind of leadership to move people quickly and to change things quickly. So under the circumstances of a crisis, such as the COVID-19 epidemic, those are the circumstances under which we do need to march in lockstep and listen to our leaders and do what we're told for public safety, for public health. So at the time when there was a hotspot in New York City and who knew how big it was going to become, the executive orders were okay and they were appropriate. Now it's time to return what happens as we come back and we open up to the legislature for a conversation about how we open up businesses, how we open up schools safely so that our educators and our children are safe, and how we get back to business. This is the time to have conversation and to release some of those executive powers. We certainly have seen a failure of leadership at the federal level. So that is you can always use that as a bad example. Here in New York State, we did not have a failure of leadership under this crisis. So yes, it's time to move back forward, and we need to also make sure that the individual districts, the assembly district of the 126, the municipalities, the school districts receive the right amount of support so that we can open safely, so that we can get back to business, get back to life, and get back to governing.
So let me ask.
I'd like to rebut.
Sure, absolutely. You have a minute.
Thank you. With respect to the allegation that there's been a failure in national leadership, I couldn't disagree more strongly. The death number that we've experienced, although every single death is tragic, 200,000, for those of us in the field of scientific modeling, this death toll could have been exceptionally larger. The president's immediate action to curtail transportation to and from China saved more lives than we lost, many more. This would have been much worse. And keep in mind, he was vigorously attacked for doing so. This was the wrong thing to do, along the lines of executives having the power, authority, and necessity to act swiftly in times of crisis. That's exactly what our president did. Our governor put positive patients in our least capable facilities, nursing homes, willingly, knowingly, and spread the infection, killing, who knows what the total number will be, approximately 12,000, as some people have stated.
I want to come back to first of all, I'll let Mr. Carvajal, if you want to respond, you can have up to a minute, and then I want to do a subset of what you've been talking about.
I'm good.
Sure. Okay. So, Mr. Carvajal, I want to start with you, and then just, if I heard you correctly, you've talked about reducing the number of powers the governor has, where there are others who would go the full swing and say, let's go back to a pre-March 13th policy where the legislature is more involved. So to what degree would you, and for those who may not know, the legislature in an emergency step just before I think it was just before the budget was adopted in April, gave the governor sweeping authority not to check in with them all the time and give them updates, whether we say daily or get permission to do everything on a regular basis. I believe he has to give them a quarterly update, and they have 2 weeks thereupon to reverse or change policy. What would you do right now as to what the governor's policies and powers are? Would you go back to before, or would you slowly reverse that? And then we'll turn to Mr. Lemondes.
I think that I would slowly reverse it. I think that we are not out of the woods yet. We have big population centers that could spike. So that's important. I think that it is important to get back to legislation. We have a legislature that is there to have the conversation, to make sure that all voices are heard. And I think that slowly over time, we should get back to that legislation. Yes, sooner rather than later. I hope that we return to normal swiftly, but slowly and over time to get back to that situation. Certainly by the time January comes around, that would probably be a time to begin to get back to it totally.
All right, thank you. Mr. Lemondes, on the issue of how quickly to roll back or restore the power of the legislature.
So thank you again. Again, I don't disagree with what occurred and the emergency powers granted initially. However, it is time. It's been 7 months, and that should be restored to the legislature. We have shown progress. We have shown the ability to act in a disciplined manner to curtail the circumstances of this pandemic. And keep in mind, this is a 100-year occurrence. And so there's nobody alive today that has experience, or probably no one alive today that has experience that we could have employed from the last pandemic. So I think it's time. I think the bill submitted again by Assembly Leader Barclay should have been approved. And so it is in my book, if I had my way today, I would have that power back in the legislature's hands now. And again, I want to make sure I don't disagree. In the beginning, Monday morning quarterbacking something is always easier. In the beginning, when we did not know what the course that this would take, the number of deaths incurred, how many resources and by what type would be needed, that power was necessary at that time, at the state level and at the national level. So, but to answer your question directly, I'm back in the legislature.
So you've mentioned nursing homes as part of the issue on COVID. Could you tell us what, I think we are clear on where you are on where you think the state handled the nursing home issue, but should there be hearings on the nursing home issue, and how should they be conducted, with what point? Is it to cast blame, to look forward to see what can be done better should this occur again? We'll give you 2 minutes on that.
Thank you. I think there should be hearings on it. I don't think it should be a witch hunt from now for the next 10 years. The families of those people who lost parents and grandparents need to have closure on this issue. They need to know why, from the public leaders that sentenced those people to death by putting knowingly infected people into our least capable facilities and infecting many others, when the USNS Comfort was available, the Javits Center was expanded. There was space to segregate these people. So for closure's sake, for budgetary reasons, you can't do this ad nauseum and spend millions and millions and millions of dollars. We know what happened. But why did that happen? Why were those executive decisions made? I can't see anyone with any scientific background endorsing that decision. It just doesn't, you know, I'm a farmer. I've got an agricultural science degree. I've practiced technically in my profession my whole life, and this makes no sense to me as a scientist whatsoever. I've modeled these things, and I know how these things spread. I know what the models look like. It just makes no sense whatsoever. So to answer your question directly, there should be hearings. Responsibility and accountability should be fixed, but exactly how long and how much money we should spend, I think that should be determined by the people through the representatives.
Hey, Mr. Carvajal, on this issue of public hearings, and if you wanted to support them, what should you be looking for?
Well, absolutely. There should always be the power to investigate things that happen. That's part of the powers of the legislature. And so if there is enough people in the legislature that feel that this is something that needs to be looked into, we absolutely need to look into it. Not necessarily to lay blame, but to look for better solutions, to find out exactly what happened under those circumstances, to make sure that it never happens again. There are some issues right now that are happening with our nursing homes that I would like to address. And one of them is visitation into our nursing homes. This is an issue. Many families have been restricted from going in and visiting their loved ones, but they are also caregivers. They are family members, yes, but their visitation helps to bring care to the individuals who are there. It brings them sometimes personal hygiene, sometimes mental health support, but it gives additional care. And these people have been kept out of nursing homes. There are 2 bills right now, one in the Senate and one in the Assembly, that addresses specifically these issues, that these family members, that these caregivers be allowed to have access to their loved ones as part of the caring of those people who are in nursing homes. So yes, we should have investigation into what happened, make sure it never happens again, to understand why it happened and when it happened. But also we need to look forward to opening up our nursing homes, to getting our loved ones cared for, and to get them out of isolation. They are isolated, and sometimes that affects their health and well-being. So again, there's legislation in the Senate and in the Assembly to address this. And I think that that's an important issue that needs to be highlighted.
So let me switch gears from what would be a nursing home and some would consider end of life to beginning of life, in the sense of you are, Ms. Carvajal, you have been a member of the school board. Mr. Lemondes, as you indicated, you have 2 people floating around your house right now doing remote learning. So let's talk about how the governor, or more importantly, how New York has handled schools. Not from a budgetary standpoint, we'll get to that in a second, but from a process standpoint, Ms. Carvajal, did the governor give enough time? Did he do the right thing when it came to reopening public schools?
Well, I think that one of the most important things is that we are safe. Okay, so that our students are safe, that their families are safe, that our educators are safe inside of these buildings. Because if we don't have our health, we don't have anything else. So coming back and opening schools and getting us back to work in kind of a hybrid situation, we're in a better situation than we were in March. In March, when we slammed the door shut on our schools, we ended up having situations where where people were just not ready. We were acting in an emergency situation. Delivery content was difficult. We didn't know what was coming. So we've had a little time to plan it. So some of the hybrid situations have been good. They are not the situation. The best situation is that we get healthy so that we can get back to school, so that we can provide education for our children. We are in an impossible situation. We are seeing a great divide in the haves and the have-nots, students who do not have internet access, and parents who are overburdened by the added support that they need to give their children and their students. So we need to get back to it, but we need to get back to it safely. We need to make sure that our educators are healthy, that our children are healthy, that parents and grandparents of our children are also healthy. So that is important. The education of our children, getting back to it, yes, also important.
Thank you. Mr. Lemondes, on the issue of how schools were opened and the process that was gone through, the governor basically told schools first week of August that they could reopen and gave some parameters. Was that handled well?
I don't think so. And I don't think so for the reason that there's a double-edged sword here. The sentencing of children to not being able to go back to school and having to be schooled from their homes, and the way this was handled at the level created disparity and economic hardship for families all over the place, and to different degrees based on the stage that the family was in, the age of the children, the working status of the parents. When you have parents who, let's say, are essential employees and must go to work for essential services, who now cannot go to work because they have to stay home to look after their minor children. You've got these situations where this policy is tearing families apart. It's severely hurting our children. My farm runs through two different school districts, Lafayette and Jamesville DeWitt. My children have gone to both schools. My wife was a school teacher the first half of her career. We know these impacts intimately. One school district goes Monday through Friday. The other one is hybrid. Ours right now is a hybrid, and I think it's terrible. My kids don't like it. I get this feedback 10 times a day, every day, Monday through Friday. And so do I think it was handled properly? I don't. I think kids should be in school. And I also think that there's a disproportionate impact the younger the child is. And I feel terrible for, I think our kids, in my case, are somewhat old enough to not be terribly hurt, but this is hurting all children. And there's, again, a disproportionate impact on rural children in rural communities that don't have broadband access or don't have good enough broadband access. And so you have farm families that, again, the #1 industry in the 126th district, which I represent, which I will look to represent, excuse me, I'm not elected, I understand that. There are a lot of rural families and rural children, rural houses. And so they are doubly hurt by this because they can't enable the tools to do what they have to do remotely. And that, again, that impacts the disabled too. There are 16,000 disabled people in this district.
So, Ms. Carvajal, you'll have a minute to follow up on that, if you'd like.
So as a lifelong educator and a member of the Auburn School Board, I want to say that school boards are elected locally. And the reason that school boards are elected locally is so that they can meet the needs of the individual school districts and the community. So that's why different school districts have different plans. And so they take into consideration what's more right for those individual students, no matter what the situation is, whether you're in a crisis or whether you're in business as usual. Those school boards and that local control of what's happening in school districts is very important. That's the conduit by which the community can tell the school district what the needs are for them, how they can be met the best. I don't believe that under these circumstances that anything can be met the best. As a 30-year educator, I certainly know how our children are suffering from not being in the classroom, how our children are suffering from not having.
I've lost you.
Not having proper connections, the difference between the haves and the have-nots. So that is something that is in my wheelhouse. It's something that I understand. I think that individual school districts are doing the best that they can under these circumstances. I don't think they're ideal circumstances at all.
Thank you.
I'd like to rebut if possible.
Sure, you have 1 minute on this as well.
Can I have a point of order?
Yeah.
If we can't hear you, please don't interrupt me when I'm talking. Thank you.
I was not interrupting you. I was letting all of you know that I couldn't hear you.
So we're having some internet connections. That's part of the process. So if you'll just raise your hand, and we'll get back to you. Especially if you could wave if you have lost connection. That'll help Robert know.
Okay, fair enough.
You'll have 1 minute on this issue of schools, and then we'll move on.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. Again, going back to how this has been handled and is being handled, I think that our schools need to get children back in their classrooms. I was at a track meet the other day, and I watched the boys soccer team practice with masks on. And it just struck me as absolute absurdity to put these kids through this when the risk to them demographically, I don't know if there have been any children nationally, except literally like 1 or 2 that have been compromised by this pandemic. And so this is really unfair to our children. And I want to make sure that everyone understands that I have seen this from, I want to go back to disabled children. I have seen this from many different aspects and could speak on this for hours. I want to make sure that the parents of disabled people, children and adults alike, have better access to schools and services as well, because you have that subset of our population, in this case, 16,000 people in the 126th district that fall into that gap that are not necessarily being looked after properly.
I want to ask, this is one item I want to pick up on. You mentioned masks. This was my next question. So I believe you're up for the first question. Should there be a statewide mandate for masks? It may not be enforceable on all properties, but at least on state properties. And we'll keep this to a minute for the response to the next week, because I'd like to get to the budget. So Mr. Lemondes, on the issue of a statewide mask mandate, specifically at least on state-run properties.
No, I think it's number one, it's impossible to enforce. I think this is a circumstance where you have to reach out to the intelligence of people to look after themselves and their willingness to do so. My son's baseball team, because of the inability to use local schools, baseball fields, we have to drive from Onondaga County to Utica for home field baseball games for 6th graders because of this. And because none of the baseball fields in Onondaga County can be used by youth in the youth leagues. It's absolutely crazy. So no, I don't think that that's enforceable. I don't think it's sensible. I think everybody, the information needs to continue to be made available for people to make the right decisions. And you have to employ common sense when you're around people wearing the mask, which we all do. And if you see someone that's forgotten it, hey, buddy, put your mask on. Here, do you need one? I've walked into stores where I've forgotten mine and had somebody looking after me say, hey, look, here, we've got one right here for you.
Ms. Carvajal, on this issue of a state mandated mask policy, or at least on state properties?
I always believe that education is the best form. We know that that masks help to keep us safe, and in some cases they work better than vaccines or other practices. So do those hygiene things. Wear your mask, wash your hands, cover your cough. We're going back inside. You know, it's time to get a flu shot. So make sure that those things that we know are going to help us, that are going to help our community, are being done. And individuals need to be cognizant of the ways that wearing of a mask helps to keep us all healthy, and it will allow us to get back to normal faster. So I believe that continuing to educate the public, to continue to inform them about good decisions, making sure they have good information about their health, about the public health, is the way to go here. I don't think that anybody is really disputing it. I think that we have to have good nature about keeping ourselves healthy and others healthy as well.
So I'm worried you guys can all see my questions, because that is my next subject, was flu shots. So the state of New York, and you both work in, one has children in school, another one is works for a public institution, Cayuga Community College. I did not know this until this year, that flu shots are not mandated, but there is a growing concern that people are not getting flu shots. Should school children be mandated, with the exception of the religious exception, and this is for Ms. Carvajal first, they have to verify that they are going to have a flu shot, and further down the line, we're going to need to mandate this for a COVID-19 vaccination. And you'll have a minute on that as well.
So flu shots have not been mandated in the past because of decisions that our healthcare providers have made, and for those people who advise us. So I don't think that under these circumstances, requiring a flu shot immediately is something that can be done easily. I think that we're being jerked around all over the place with one change and another. So to mandate a flu shot right now might be difficult. And we don't know what unless you're going to provide those flu shots to everyone, and know that you can provide them to everyone free of charge, people with and without health care, doing it quickly or trying to mandate it at this point would probably be very difficult. But if down the road, as the medical professionals look at these, the need for this, then their recommendations could be looked at that point.
I just want to follow up, and we'll give Mr. Lemondes an equal amount of time. But we do mandate certain shots right now for children. Before they can go to public school, there are a series of shots that I know Dr. Graney in Auburn just loves to give. I say that sarcastically because no child likes to get a shot. But we do mandate other shots and a series of shots for school children to go to school. Why would the flu shot or a possible COVID vaccine be different? We'll give you 30 minutes, and then we'll give Mr. Lemondes a minute and a half on this.
I'm not saying that they are any different. I'm saying that those decisions were made with all the stakeholders involved. So educators and school boards and medical health professionals over time have advised as to what vaccines were best for the public health. So and for our school children, not to spread some very deadly diseases, right? We don't give vaccines for diseases that children don't suffer from. So suffer severely from. So that is what I'm saying. Have the discussion about whether the flu shot and the COVID shot is necessary to open public schools, and go from there. So just to be more inclusive in the conversation and take the advice of medical professionals. So I am the other vaccinations such as polio and those are things that had some discussion. I just don't think that we can implement a flu vaccine mandate tomorrow. I think that's not going to happen. It shouldn't happen.
Thank you. Mr. Lemondes, we'll give you a minute at the same time on this issue of mandating, whether it's for flu or for a possible, we hope, COVID vaccine.
Thank you. No, I don't think that should be mandated unless it becomes an issue of national security with respect to some of the other terrible things that we've had, which led to the laws that you and I grew up as getting those vaccines that we all had, those vaccinations that we all had to get. And I ask healthcare professionals all the time when I'm in the VA. My care comes from the VA, and I've met many healthcare professionals that even as healthcare professionals choose to not get the flu shot every year. This is a very, very individual thing. It's strain based, and our medical community does the best they can to prepare us in advance for the strain that they think will show itself. But on the other side of this issue, being in the military, where vaccinations, whether you want them or not, are compulsory, and I'm using the anthrax vaccine for those of us that were deployed to the first Gulf War had to get. I've been on both sides of this. I understand it as a soldier, I understand it as a parent, and I understand it as a citizen. Unless the risk posed is immediate and can do horrendous things like polio, like chicken pox, for example, those vaccines that we've all gotten. I think that this needs to be done with the legislature.
Okay. Ms. Carvajal, I'm going to give you 15 seconds because I want to run over to the budget.
Just quickly, I do want to say that we understand super spreader situations differently than we did before this. Schools are always places that are indoors and that a lot of people congregate. They are always places where people get sick. And so I know our teachers absolutely know that those situations are there. We get colds fast and we get flu fast. So we have to remember that those are situations where lots of people congregate.
All right, I couldn't agree more.
So we're going to turn to the budget, but just for those who may not be Wednesday morning roundtable participants who may be reading or seeing this on the Citizens Auburn Pub website, we do want to say this is the Wednesday morning roundtable program for October 21st. We are having the candidates for the 126th Assembly District, Dia Carabajal, who's on the Democratic and Working Families Party line, and John Lemondes, who is on the Republican Conservative Independence line. They're participating in a forum here. We have Jesse Klein, our coordinator, who's holding up a yellow card for the 30 seconds before you have to finish, and then she holds up a red card to tell you to finish up. So let's talk about the big hole in the budget right now for the last 20 or so minutes. So back in April, the thought was there was a 14, and this was 2 weeks into the pandemic for the state. There was a $14.5 billion hole. That number has grown. We're not sure exactly to what length. In the conversation I had yesterday with a member of the Assembly, it sounds like it's much larger. You either can close that gap one of three ways. You can either cut programs, raise taxes, or go into debt. So we are 6 months into the new fiscal year. I think we're starting with Ms. Carvajal. I think you're up first. How do you close that 14.5 or larger debt?
Well, there's plenty of proposals that are out there to tax the ultra rich. In New York State, there is a lot of loopholes that disproportionately advantage the ultra rich. They don't pay necessarily their fair share of taxes. We all do as the middle class. We pay our fair share of taxes. There are also other programs not only to close the loopholes, but to take a look at adding tax brackets at the top. This is something that is something that we need to look at very seriously. Well, that will not close the budget gap. It certainly will help, and over time it will help as well after our crisis. We need to We need to continue to press our federal representatives to pass some support for municipalities, for the state, for our school districts. We need to know what that is going to be, and we need to be able to plan on it. And that needs to happen as soon as possible. One of the things that we do as representatives is that we advocate for our constituents. We need to advocate up to the federal government to pass stimulus so that we can plan, so that we know. We need to advocate out. We need to go out to other districts, to the governor, to the lieutenant governor, and we need to educate ourselves as to ways in which to increase revenue and to help us as we move forward through this crisis.
Mr. Lemondes, at least 14.5 billion, and I should repeat that with a B, not an M, $1 billion hole. Normally, it's either raise taxes, cut programs, or go into deficit.
I'm going to answer that question this way, Guy. There are several things, and there's no shortage of them. Number one, reopening the economy so that at least that revenue stream can be restored. There are 600,000 small businesses alone in New York State employing 4.2 million people, which some degree of which can't go back to work. So that has to be fixed. We have to reopen the economy. Taxes, the Assembly Democrats want to raise them higher. I don't think that is the right thing to do, because I think that's a contributing factor to the outmigration that we see in New York. Since 2010 alone, we have lost 1.4 million people in New York, with a sundry number of businesses leaving. We have chased away economic opportunity. Two examples are the Amazon facility that would have gone in lower New York, and the Democrats praised that as a success when they ran those 25,000 jobs or more to another state. I think that would have been great for New York. I think our governor thought that would have been great for New York. Again, the Remington Arms Factory in Ilion, New York, peripheral economic value, when that expansion was blocked from New York State and Alabama got it. Alabama welcomed that expansion, $87 million in peripheral benefit to the Alabama economy. They welcomed that. It helped them immensely. Outmigration has to be stopped. Utility rates have to be decreased. We pay the second highest in the country, highest minimum wage in the country, highest taxes in the country. These things are not good by any measure. We can do better. And this is why I'm running for office, to represent individual citizens, business owners like myself, who are getting crushed by our current environment. And you have to ask the question, with the ultra rich, are we better off with them or without them? Because I saw the governor beg them to come back on TV, because he knows the policies of New York are chasing not just the ultra rich, but regular people away in droves to Florida. Average income of the families leaving, $90,000 per family. 23% of that 1.4 million went to Florida alone.
Thank you, Mr. Lemondes. Ms. Carvajal, you'll have 1 minute on this.
We know that there is no magic pill that is going to fix what's happening right now. There's no manufacturing magic pill that's going to happen. It has to happen through long-term planning and careful thought. So one of the issues is not the long-term planning that we have. Right now, the budget deficit is caused by the crisis that is at hand. The budget deficit is caused by the crisis that is at hand. And to lose sight of that for long-term planning is I think, a mistake. We need to get through this crisis. We need to be healthy. We need to be healthy economically. We need to get back to regular business in order to cover the immediate crisis situation. So there's no magic pill that's going to fix this. We need leaders who have empathy when making the decisions to cut programs, because chances are, with a deficit like that, it's going to come out of programs that support our public sector, our firemen, our policemen, our schools are going to be affected by this deficit. We need empathy, and we need an eye on what is happening in our own community to make sure that we are funding a crisis.
Thank you.
I'd like to rebut.
Sure, you'll have 1 minute.
Thank you. When it comes to the economy, there are several things that make it work. And I know this, you can't have more going out than you've got coming in. That's never sustainable in the long term. And when your policies that are decades long are driving people away, again, we have the highest outmigration. So this is the metric. We have the highest outmigration in the nation. So people are leaving intentionally. I've had 2 people on my street in the last 4 years move to Tennessee. Not 2 people, 2 families on my street anecdotally moved to Tennessee in the last 4 years for this very reason. People are leaving New York intentionally because they can, because they are getting crushed. The deficit, the current position that we're in has nothing to do with the COVID pandemic. It's only exacerbated by it. The underlying structural issues are the cause. Everybody knows this, that knows anything about economics. And the number of state employees that we have. Look at Florida's budget versus ours. Look at the opportunity there, which is what's taking, again, 23% of our 1.4 million residents that left went to Florida alone. So I want it to be known on the record that if we continue to have policies and tax structures that force people out, they're going to continue to leave. And every time a family leaves, especially a working family, it exacerbates the problem and makes your pool smaller.
Thank you. Ms. Carvajal, have 1 minute on this as well.
Outmigration in the Finger Lakes is not as severe as it is in other places. Our population is pretty flat. We offer a lifestyle that is attractive to many people to live. We live in the Finger Lakes. It's a beautiful region to live in New York State, and we have many things to offer. So I just want to offer that it is not all gloom and doom in the Finger Lakes. There is a flat population in the 126th Assembly District.
I'd like to rebut.
Sure, we'll give you 1 minute, and then we're going to move on to the next part of the budget.
Sure, absolutely. Nowhere did I say it's all doom and gloom. I did want to let it be known for the record, though, that these factors that are contributing to the question exist, and they are state laws, so they impact every region. And in the 126 districts, Chenango County, for example, is losing approximately 5 people a month and has been for a very long time. So the district is much larger than just the Finger Lakes area. A big piece of it is in the Finger Lakes, but it's an entire assembly district with 135,000 people, 9,000 veterans, 66,000 women. That's a big district that's representative of New York State as a whole. And it all boils down to, if you've got reasons for people to stay, they will. If you have reasons for people to stay and start businesses, again, 600,000 small businesses in New York employing 4.2 million people, that will blossom and bloom with the opportunity to be successful.
So let me unpack part of this, and let's deal with school budgets, because that is, so the governor during the summer talked about if there was not aid, and we don't need to get into all the aid issue from Washington. If there was not aid issue though from Washington, there would be a 20-20-20 cut, 20 for public schools, 20 for higher education, and 20 in health and benefits of that nature. Should school districts right now, who are already dealing with the costs of PPE, with a whole set of items that they're dealing with, should they be off the table for cuts? And if so, where do you get the money from to make up that? And if they're on the table, how do they solve their problems? And we'll start with Mr. Lemondes first. 2 minutes on the issue of school funding specifically for New York State.
Thanks. Well, there are 23 components of school funding in New York State. And I want to say overarchingly, cuts to schools are generally bad. And I think in light of the circumstances that we find ourselves in, we have to at least make the statement to stay neutral for some time period. I don't know what that time period is, in order to dig out of this hole. And a lot of things have to get done. Number one, I don't necessarily agree with the premise that the 2020-20 split, that's called the peanut butter approach in many budget areas. And I don't know what the logic behind that was. It doesn't necessarily make sense to just take broadband proportional splits to large segment public issues like schooling. I think with respect to society, schooling is one of the most important things that we have. We all have a debt to society with respect to our schools and our children. And I have said this before, when people think they should be exempt from school taxes completely because they no longer have children in school or they don't have children, I disagree with that completely. Because again, we all have a debt to our society. We live in the wealthiest society in the world. We have the greatest opportunity in the world. That opportunity should be expanded upon, and equal schooling access is one of the ways to do that. So the numbers are daunting. The budget, the way it's expanded, is detrimental to us all. I mean, you can't keep raising property taxes and school taxes ad nauseum out of control and expect there not to be second order effects, detrimental second order effects, again, exacerbating more people moving out of state, therefore exacerbating the problem as a whole. So I think that this is an issue that must be looked at very carefully, very proportionally, and at least for the time being, no additional funding.
All right, thank you. Ms. Carvajal, this issue of how do you deal with school budgets, you've been on the school board before, keeping schools whole, making the cuts, how do you make it up?
I think that we need to keep our schools whole. So there are so many issues that here under this circumstance where school budgets are going to be cut, that we have issues. One of the issues for our foundation aid is formula is broken. It creates donut holes, and it unfairly disadvantages small cities and rural school districts, and we don't necessarily get our fair share. So when there are school cuts, they still go through that same broken foundation aid formula. So even under those circumstances, it won't just be a 20% cut for our rural and small city school districts. It'll be much larger than that, because the Auburn schools already gets 40% less than average on the for school funding per student. And so there is an issue of the broken foundation aid formula that is already there. 20%, you drop the 20%, it is much worse for us. We need people who are in the legislature who can speak to this when these cuts happen, to know that it is going to disadvantage us at a greater amount than it will other areas. There is also not only the school aid formula, but there is the issue of shares. Shares inside of the education formula guarantees that certain school districts get a certain amount of a share of the overall school budget. That is something that also needs to be addressed. So when 20% of educational funding is dropped, and then it goes through a foundation aid formula that disadvantages small towns and rural districts, that's where we are as the 126th Assembly District. So no, we need to fix our foundation aid formula. We need to make sure that cuts are not made to education. We need to make sure that we get our fair share of the educational.
So one of the components here for schools right now is the 2% tax cap. And I'll start with Ms. Carvajal and then go to Mr. Lemondes. There's a 2% tax cap. Should, in this extraordinary circumstance of COVID-19 and what budget circumstances districts have to go through, whether it's increasing internet costs, whether it's hardware for students, PPE, should school districts be exempted from the 2% tax cap for the next year or two. We're only going to give you 1 minute on this because I want to hit 2 more quick issues before we go to your closing statements. Go ahead, Ms. Barwon.
I believe in the 2% tax cap. However, what I don't believe is the supermajority to override it. I believe that not only for the next few years, but permanently, the supermajority to override the tax cap can be a problem in emergency situations as well. Again, school districts and municipalities have the ability to raise revenue. And one of the things that they can do is you can always override the tax cap. That supermajority under an emergency situation could be insurmountable if the community wanted to do that. So I am a believer in the tax cap. I believe that also some issues inside of the tax cap formula, because it's not transparent, as none of these things that come out of Albany are, but there are some adjustments that could probably be made inside there to make it fairer to school districts, to make it fairer to municipalities who are trying to cover their costs. So yeah.
Mr. Lemondes, the issue of the giving a 2% tax cap exemption for school districts?
I am also in concurrence with that, as well as the Assembly Bill 0959, to study this in depth to determine what exactly can be done, what's in the realm of possibility without crushing students. You know, I want to go back to my own time as a youth in a home that was strapped. And I remember several years, my school district voted down its athletic budget, which made it nearly impossible for me to participate in sports. We had to do all kinds of crazy things. My mother did not have the money to pay for that. And every kid had to pay for sports if you wanted to participate. I think this is crazy to see these things happening. And so I am a proponent of education in more ways than one. And I think ultimately this has to be looked at very cautiously and very intelligently and from a bipartisan perspective, because these are our children, our youth, and the continuance of our society as a whole. I lost you.
Hold on just 1 second to make sure we get you back before we, can you hear us now?
Yes.
Okay. Ms. Carvajal, you have 15 seconds, and then because I want to move on to one last topic before we close out.
I would like to quickly add that pay to play is illegal in New York State. I don't know what happened there, but it is illegal in New York State. A true 2% tax cap to make it transparent, because sometimes after you go through the formula, the 2% tax cap is really 3.1 or it's 1.5, and that would be helpful.
Mr. Lemondes, we don't have recreational marijuana in New York State, should we?
No, I completely disagree with recreational marijuana use. It's a gateway drug. It actually, the legalization of marijuana in states where it has been legalized has contributed to greater black market activity. And so it's creating the thought was that it would crowd out the illegal activity. It hasn't. It's gone the other way. And so state police in interstate relationships are confiscating more marijuana where it's being produced legally and exported to states where it's not legal. I think overall, from a responsible perspective, if there is, and keep in mind, we produce the chemical industry in the U.S. produces thousands of new compounds every year. And so if this one has, or its derivative components have legitimate medicinal value and purpose, and that is appropriately controlled in the medical system, that's one thing. And I wouldn't argue that. But the legalization for broad spectrum use doesn't serve any of us well. I have seen kids that have become drug addicts on other things. usually is part of the equation, and I don't think that it serves any of us well.
Ms. Carvajal, the idea of legalizing recreational marijuana in New York?
I'm okay with it. I'm okay with it. I think that in other states, it has been done in a controlled situation, and they have created a revenue stream that helps to balance their budget. I think it's a new revenue stream, and it's a very large possibility for sales tax and that sort of thing. I think that it is a local decision. I think that what was proposed a year ago was proposed so that it would be up to counties, it would be up to municipalities as to whether it was right for that individual location inside. So Cayuga County and Oswego County would have control over whether or not that was going to happen in their county. Large cities, they would have control themselves, but there are no large cities inside the 126th district that are big enough to make the decision on their own. So it would fall to the county to make the decision for the constituents of the 126th. Now, there are regulations that are in place that in Massachusetts, where this has been done, it's been done quite successfully and safely and in very controlled environments. So I would offer that model, the model of other states where it has happened. And again, I believe that it's a revenue stream that could be used to balance the budget. The numbers out of Massachusetts are very, very large as far as the sales tax revenue that it has produced.
So
I'd like to rebut that if possible.
Sure, you're gonna have 15 seconds and I want to go to the very last question. So go ahead.
There's no doubt that some tax revenue will be generated. Any product for sale generates tax revenue. However, one of the greatest problems in rural areas, which this district primarily is, again, its #1 business is agriculture, is drug use among youth for many reasons. And so putting another one that we know has detrimental effects, making it legal, making it widely available, doesn't help any children whatsoever. And I just I want it on the record that I am not a proponent of making it easier for people to get illegal drugs, even when legalized.
Thank you. So I'd like to go to the last question. You've both been on the ballot in one shape or form over the years. It's a two-part question, but it only needs a minute of an answer. And I think, Ms. Carvajal, you're up first. Is voting in New York safe? And just as importantly, some of you, and I believe you are one, who has had to wait after an election to find out the results. Should New York start counting ballots earlier, even though they don't publicly release the numbers, but start the process of counting ballots before Election Day?
Yes, I believe New York is a safe place to vote. I would like to see more people engaged. I would rather see an opt-out rather than an opt-in. We have to physically register to vote. I think people should automatically be registered to vote. I think New York State has been the individual Board of Elections do a great job. I think it is safe, and they have provided additional ways to vote and early voting that can engage the population in this situation. I think that they can start to count votes early. They're not going to this time, but I think that they can find a safe and secure way to do that. I would definitely support opening those votes early. Maybe not this time, but maybe down the road.
Mr. Lemondes, is voting in New York safe? And more importantly, or just as importantly, should they count votes early?
I have no reason to think that voting is unsafe. Neither I nor my wife nor anyone in my family has ever felt unsafe voting or feels unsafe voting in person as a result of the pandemic circumstances now. With respect to counting the ballots early, as long as the ballots are legal and the process is secure, I don't think there's anything wrong with it.
Well, thank you both for your time. We're going to close out with 2-minute closings. The luxury of being the Wednesday morning roundtable where we're online is we do not have to stick to an hour. We're just a little bit over that. When you're on television in 2 weeks, we will keep you to an hour, by the way. But we're going to end with 2-minute closings, and as we did with a flip of a coin, John Lemondes, who is on the Republican Conservative Independence Party line, you have 2 minutes to close out.
Thank you very much. As I wrap up, I want to point out that I am one of, if not the only candidate that has quietly served you already for decades in many capacities and under extremely demanding circumstances. I hope my honorable service, industry experience, finance, budgeting, business experience as a farmer, small business owner are all things that you value and that you'll recognize as being important to New York State. Last, I hope that you recognize my team focus and that I recognize the necessity of being able to function as part of one. And it's imperative, no matter what, that we work together. And again, I have the bulk of my adult life working apolitically and am very capable of doing that and have done that all over the world on your behalf. As your neighbor, colleague, friend, and hopefully representative, thank you for the opportunity to address you today.
Thank you, Mr. Lemondes. And we're now hearing Dia Carabajal, who is on the Democratic and Working Families Party line. You have 2 minutes to close out as well.
Thank you so much. So I'm deeply concerned. I'm deeply concerned about the COVID-19 pandemic, which threatens our well-being, our physical wellness, as well as our economic soundness and the quality of life that we have. This will take precedent over every issue that is before us. We will need leaders with us and for us. We need representation in the majority house to be heard by the Albany leadership. We will need representation with the ability to act. Decisions that affect us will be made swiftly by those in power. I'm deeply concerned about the freshwater bodies and waterways that are threatened by global climate disruption. We have harmful algal blooms in our lakes and invasive species in our water and in our trees that are threatening our water quality. We run the risk of being overlooked in Albany yet again. This is not new. This is something we have endured for multiple decades. As rural communities, small cities, we've lacked representation in a position to provide funding back to our communities. Our school districts, we watch as other districts get funding and we are overlooked. As municipalities, we have heard, I understand, but I'm in the minority, you know. Our city streets are crumbling. Well, we do not have funds that come back. Our college is underfunded with flat funding. Our schools are underfunded. We need someone in Albany who will be able to bring it home. So my experience as an elected official will help me to hit the ground running. Our community of Central New York deserves better. Our community deserves representation in the majority. I ask you to trust me with your vote. I know that you have before. Thank you. Remember to vote November 3rd.
Thank you. Thank you, Dia Carabajal. And again, we've had Dia Carabajal, who's on the Democratic and Working Families Party lines, as well as John Lemondes, who's on the Republican, Conservative, and Independence line. We want to thank you both for your time. Also for putting yourself out there. No easy task, especially in the COVID-19 world. But we wish you well on the campaign trail. As this is being played on October 21st, remote voting does start this weekend, where people can go out and vote early, and we encourage them to do so. We will be taking a brief hiatus of about a month. We'll be back after Thanksgiving with several new Wednesday morning roundtable programs. Among those topics that we'll be talking about is the state budget and what the outlook is for not only public schools, but also higher education, as well as the business community and not-for-profits who have had some retainage right now and some non-renewal of their contracts. We'll also be talking about the impact of the virus, not necessarily from a health perspective, but from a perspective on businesses in our region and how, whether you're a startup or a well-established business, you might have been impacted. And we'll also be bringing you a program on rebranding that is being done by the Cayuga Economic Development Agency, ADA, the Auburn Industrial Development Authority. So we hope you'll join those programs with us in the future. As always, we want to thank Tompkins Trust for sponsoring the Wednesday morning roundtable. I want to thank both Jesse Klein and Robert Hoffman for putting all this together and doing the technical side of this that makes this go on live or goes on the air so that our members can tune in. And we encourage you, if you are not a Wednesday morning roundtable member, to join. I'm Guy Cosentino. I'm the Executive Director of Cayuga Community Colleges Foundation. We hope you have a great Thanksgiving. Make sure you go out and vote, and I'll turn it back over to Robert.
Thank you for joining us for this bid program brought to you by Tompkins Trust Company. Our next video program will premiere on December 9th. To join the roundtable, please visit auburndowntown.org and click on WMR. Once again, thank you to all the participants, and get out there and vote.